Hello, people. So welcome to the Marketer's Guide to Growth in the Search First Age. We have the pleasure of being joined today by Scott Brinker. My name is Simon Campbell. I've been involved with DeepCrawl since the very, very beginning. My background is as an entrepreneur and investor. And then more recently, moving across the pond here, I spent 18 months in Cincinnati as interim COO for P&G Ventures with the wonderful people there. Great experience. I'm now back in Boston, which is where Scott is. Scott, quick introduction from you.
Yes, thanks, Simon. Great to be here with you. I'm Scott Brinker. I wear a couple hats. I'm the VP of Platform Ecosystem at Hubspot. I'm also the editor of chiefmartech.com, blog that's been looking at how marketing technology has evolved over the past, 12, 13, 14 years now. And also in the program chair of the MarTech conference. So it's kind of all MarTech 24/7, 365 days a year.
Very cool. And so just quickly, an introduction to everyone to the agenda. The structure is going to be 30 minutes of presentation and conversation between the two of us, followed by 10 to 15 minutes of live Q&A. You will notice a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom chat window. Please start putting your questions in there as we go along, and we'll get to as many as we can. There's also a short survey at the end when we finish up. Please stick around for all of 1 minute to fill that in. It's very useful to us, and it will hopefully help us tailor content in the future. This webinar will also be viewed on demand, recorded, written up, and on the webinar, so on the website early next week. So you can share it with all of your colleagues and hopefully revisit some of the core elements. So let's get started. A little bit of background to start with, the current state of play in search marketing. Previously, when I first got involved in SEO, and I know Scott will have some views on this, it was very much seen as a dark art. You know, you were listening to people talking about building links, and no one really understood how to get ranked in Google. And there was kind of this little box with someone sat in the corner doing crazy dark arts. Over the time, this has evolved, obviously. Up until recently, it was still relatively siloed as a function. I think that's fair to say. But over time, the groups have joined together, and SEO has become an integrated part of everything to do with digital marketing. More recently, we've had a lot of issues, obviously, over the last 12 months or so with the likes of COVID, and we've seen this progression of digital assets becoming probably where we thought they would be in 10 years' time. Things like e-commerce really taking over from the physical world as COVID hit and we got stuck in our rooms. As a result of this, a lot of organizations I know have jumped on paid search and started spending a lot of money. And this is a little bit of a race to the bottom because you get a lot of organizations, chasing the same audiences through these paid search methods. And so the role of SEO has really grown through this process as we think about the technical part of the architecture of a website, meeting with content, meeting with outreach, and really the user becoming a lot more, I'd say, focused on the experience, right, Scott, as far as what they expect from a website. You can't just jump on and expect to wait for pages to load and so forth.
Yeah, I've heard the saying that the last best experience that a customer had anywhere is now the new experience they kind of expect everywhere. So yeah, you're definitely competing on digital experience with the best of them out there.
So I think this is interesting where we can really start kicking off the core topic of today. We're talking about this converging of business functions into the marketing arena. And so, we just briefly in the intro touching on the fact that SEO was very much a self-contained unit before. And I would suggest that certainly the CMO and a large part of the marketing team didn't necessarily know what they were doing, what it meant, but understood that it helped rankings. But really there's been this converging between SEO, marketing, development teams. What have you seen, Scott, kind of in this conversion?
Yeah, in fact, actually, if we go to that next slide, I think this is a pattern that has emerged in several different dimensions of marketing. The first level of that pattern is the fact that, yeah, even within marketing, the individual specializations that we've had, whether it was, on the search side, or how we might have been handling, our advertising campaigns, or, what the experience was like for people who were engaging through email campaigns. We recognize that the experience the customer has jumps between those different marketing touch points at an incredibly fast rate. I mean, like it's just fluid, often in a matter of minutes, and so to deliver that, coherent and consistent experience, we've had to start to look at marketing operations in general as a way of making sure that all these pieces are connected. But it gets bigger than that, because it's not just marketing operations. It really is like these handoffs between marketing and whether it's, sales teams, or call center folks, or customer service, wherever these different touch points are for your business. Again, we're recognizing that from the customer's perspective, they don't care about our internal organization or any of those specializations or anything. They just expect things to smoothly cross these boundaries when they connect with us. And so this is why we've seen, this rise of not only, greater marketing ops, but in businesses also sales ops, or, around the e-commerce ops or customer service ops, or even connecting these things together in revenue ops, where we can start to get a larger picture of how we can coordinate the business.
That's interesting. So I think if we look a little bit at the roads towards search ops, which is, I know where you've been focusing a lot with this work, what we're talking about is really taking SEO out of the bunker and transforming it into this kind of secret weapon, right? And it's more than just skills, and it's also like a mindset, right? So how do we talk about changing the mindset and integrating SEO throughout the organization as part of this overall kind of landscape and team approach?
Yeah. So let's actually move to the next slide on this too, because so this is that crazy graphic that I suspect many of you have seen, and I apologize.
I remember seeing this when it was about 200 maybe logos, back in the day, back in 2010.
Yeah, it's just crazy. So this has been my my very strange hobby over the past decade, has just been tracking the different marketing technology solutions out there. And exactly as you say, Simon, it like grew from, a few hundred, not too many years ago to, yeah, this last version we did was 8,000, so it's absolutely crazy. But this is actually, part of what has been driving the, power and benefit of marketing operations overall. And I would assume now that most CMOs, yeah, if you're listening here, you're probably pretty familiar with marketing operations right now, and have started to recognize that, okay, I've got to be able to connect all these pieces together. But what's important here is marketing operations is really just sort of one dimension of the operations infrastructure we think about connecting. So if we go to this next slide here, one of the things I did was highlight for search in particular, it is definitely not just an isolated capability. That good search engine optimization gets embedded in so many of the content and experience touch points that we have throughout our organization, and so this is why, okay, we got our heads around the concept of marketing operations and how we orchestrate marketing overall, but really now starting to recognize that, okay, there's even this more specialized subdiscipline of search operations that needs to be able to connect many of the different facets, of the marketing department, and frankly, even beyond the marketing department as well. And so one of the ways I look at this, if you go to this next slide here, is increasingly with all these different capabilities out there and all these different technologies that help enable these capabilities, one of the things we've realized is as marketers, we can't be the people like, connecting all the wires and having rubber band and scotch tape and all this stuff to make it happen. Like, yes, there's a lot of technologies and a lot of specialization, but what we really need more than anything else from the marketing technology ecosystem is platforms that are able to sit at one layer below all these specialized apps, or whether they're custom apps that we're building ourselves, like our website or our mobile app, our e-commerce store, or anything like that, but also specialized apps that we're buying off the shelf from other vendors as well too. Underneath that, we really want platforms that help connect these pieces together. They help share the data across them. They help orchestrate, making sure the right things are getting to the right place at the right time. And to me, this has been the most exciting transformation happening in marketing technology over the past few years. And DeepCrawl is actually a fantastic example of a way of moving from a world where SEO was probably not too many years ago thought of as, oh yeah, I have this specialized app. So yeah, I'm going to track down some links and I'll see what I've got there. Like it's a specialized app function, to something that recognizes, no, the real power of SEO today is to have it at that platform layer below, where it's able to feed into all of the other applications and content and experience capabilities that we build across our organization.
So I think what's interesting here, Scott, is we went through a phase, and seeing that landscape is super interesting, because it reminds us, over the last few years, everyone was talking about big data, right? And let's go and make sure that we've got all of this data. And then there's all of these stats about how much of that data is really being used. And so building on your point about the right tools linking together to give you the right data to make valuable business decisions. I think that's an area where, certainly within the marketing world, you can't do this in isolation, right? You need to be able to take this data plus this data to make a decision about where you're going to point the money, how people are going to work through the funnel when they land on your site. And how do you see that evolving a little bit now with people's use of data plus tech?
Wow, I would almost say we, had set this up in advance to be the perfect segue to this next little section, because I'd love to talk a little bit about this shift from big data to big ops. And so for the past decade, let's say, more or less, if we go to the next slide, there's been so much talk about big data. For good reasons, right? I mean, just the amount of data that organizations, have had flowing into them, have responsibility for, it's grown exponentially, and so there were all these challenges of like, okay, well, how do we deal with that complexity of all that data, at this volume and velocity and variety? And the good news is, actually, we've made a lot of advances. Most organizations now have incredible capabilities, whether it's, with data warehouses or data lakes or CDPs, or, I mean, we're starting to really get our arms around big data. But big data had largely been in this mode of like, all right, yeah, we'll collect all this data, and yes, we've got a place to store it. And okay, if we want to analyze some of this big data, I guess we can hire one of those, specialist data scientists who can, go and, mine that data for insights to us, but it was kind of at an arm's length away from the actual day-to-day operations of the rest of the organization. And this is where things are in the process of changing dramatically, and certainly to your point at the beginning of this, Simon, that, the past year just had this incredible acceleration of, as we move from having digital components of our business to really thinking about like how we run as a digital business. What we're realizing is it's not just about the data, but it's now about all the different apps and agents and automations and customer touch points and employee touch points and all these things that actually have to work with this data in a very continuous basis, on a day-by-day basis. We're doing things with it, and so this is what I see as the shift from big data to big ops. And I know this picture is a little bit of a crazy illustration, so I came up with a better metaphor on this next slide here, which is basically, you know, if we think of big data as like, it was the big data lake far off in the mountains, you know, pristine and beautiful. And if we wanted to go to the big data lake, we needed, you know, a Sherpa data scientist who could guide us there so we could peer into the deep waters, you know, wonderful stuff. Today, big ops, it's a little bit more like an interactive water park. Like, yeah, there's all this water here, but there are a lot of people in this, you know, not just inside our company. Again, like our customers are expecting to be able to have access to relevant data that impacts their experience as well too. You know, the experience we're delivering to search engines out there are a way in which they are tapping into the data, you know, that we have across our organization. And so the shift from big data to big ops is really about not just having all this data, but how do we get value out of that? And so if you'll forgive me another illustration here on this next slide, you know, there's something really exciting about how we get value out of data. And I look at it on two dimensions. So one dimension, which I'll call data distillation, it's like, how do we go from raw data to actually being able to get to information and knowledge and insights. And our capabilities there are, you know, what we could call our data intelligence capabilities. But there's
Just on this, it's interesting as we think about, it's almost the vanity sanity piece, right? In the equation that we have multiple examples of, and you can have all of the data in the world and you have all of this stuff, but getting down to that key piece and being able to demonstrate and understand which two pieces of data equal a decision point.
I'm going to absolutely steal, you know, sanity versus vanity. Or that's awesome. All right. So, but you're right. It's one dimension of how do we get to the right information or insight. But there's a second dimension to this too, which is, to me, more about data activation. How do we go from just storing data or just reporting on it to getting to a place where we're able to make decisions on it and execute on it? And the reason I put the little stopwatch there is because it's not just about making decisions and executing on them in human time, like saying, okay, well, when we get to the next board meeting, we will make some decisions about that data and then spend the next 2 quarters executing on them. It's also about, like, how do we leverage algorithms and automations that, when they're feeding into this data in a more continuous basis, are able to make decisions to impact customer experience and optimize, you know, the business in a matter of, sub-second, response time, which is actually why I call it, if the top half of this graph is about getting data value from data intelligence, to me, the second half of this graph is really about getting data value out of our data reflexes.
That actually makes me think about a real life example where one of the large enterprise organization worked out that it takes them 6 times as much time and effort and cost to fix something that's gone wrong with their website post pushing it live than it does picking it up beforehand and being able to fix it then. So this whole concept of having the right information at the right time and doing something with it can play into that as well.
Yes, very well said, which actually then is a great way to move into this next visualization. So a little bit earlier, we were talking about how marketing ops has expanded. It's connecting to all these other, customer related ops. We have revenue ops trying to serve as an umbrella there. What's fascinating is this is in no way limited to just the core marketing department. Is as we move to this mode where big ops, how we do data intelligence and data reflexes is so valuable across the organization, what we're seeing are all these more specialized kinds of ops that have been popping up all over the place. So yeah, marketing ops is a big part of it, on the, IT or product development side. DevOps, of course, has been very big, but there's all these other specialties, even like how we manage, data, and there's analytics ops and AI ops, with our website and our e-commerce store. We have web ops groups. We might have a growth ops group on top of that. It's probably connected connecting into things like localization ops, content ops. And so all these cool different ops functions. And this is again, part of why I think, this evolution to big ops is not just about these specialized ops capabilities in different facets of the business, but it's now, how do we start to think about connecting across them? And so this is what gets me really, really excited about search ops. In this next slide, it's about looking at search ops as a capability that's able to intersect and support many of these other different operational capabilities in a big ops world. It's how we orchestrate, what's happening from a marketing, department set of objectives, to how we deliver it through the website, to how do we make sure that's working in localization as we go across different markets, to make sure that, it's being embedded, in the product capabilities that we are building out and deploying through digital touch points as well too. And so this is where, things start to get really exciting when you're like, okay, this collection of ops, big ops, is the next 10 years of what's going to make digital businesses competitive. Search ops is one layer we can bring across that to make sure that, okay, all of these things that are going to end up impacting how our company is found in the great wide world of all these, search capabilities out there, like having this orchestrated through a common underlying platform is an absolute game changer.
So Scott, how do you, from a practical perspective, obviously thinking at it, having been in business owner, having been in large courts, you've got people that were in certain roles or had certain training. Maybe you're sitting there as a 20, 25-year veteran CMO, and you're suddenly saying, my world is changing. I used to be more brand focused. I used to be more traditional out-facing marketing, non-digital tools. It's not just a change in, we talk about a change in culture, obviously, but there's a change in the way that organizations have to be shaped. How do you see some of the challenges of that, even from a people perspective, evolving?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one of the recognitions here, and I first want to start by saying, like, all of the previous responsibility and, value capabilities in the marketing organizations as we've known them, those haven't gone away. Those are as important as they have ever been. If you don't have a great brand, if you are not a great shepherd of your brand and that experience that, how the world views you, a lot of the other things you would execute aren't going to matter. So that's still super, super important. But what we are seeing is an expansion of what needs to be executed in order to deliver on that brand promise, And so there are definitely, this is one of the reasons why, marketing operations, has continued to expand as a discipline, is because there are a different set of skills for people who are, orchestrating these systems, who are managing these systems, that needs to be a part of the overall marketing department. But not everyone in marketing needs to be a marketing ops specialist. Search ops to me is really exciting because, again, it does span what may be several different teams. It might even span, a couple different departments, depending on, okay, who's running the, e-commerce site or the website, how embedded is this with other product development you might be doing for, digital apps, and again, how the marketing organization is thinking about orchestrating, attracting, engaging, and delighting customers. So you can have search ops specialists, that whether they're sitting within marketing or perhaps a more specialized web e-commerce group, something like that. You definitely need a net new set of skills, for, what those folks do. But again, this is where the value is of something like a platform, because you don't want every single digital business on the planet having to figure this out from scratch themselves. The whole advantage of platforms is we want to be able to stand on the shoulders of giants. We want to be able to take off-the-shelf capabilities, that get us 90% of the way to being able to execute, that continuity across digital touch points. And then the 10% we're bringing on top of that is the 10% that is very specific to our business.
Yeah, and we're going to talk, I think, we're going to talk a little bit about how automation comes into this. I just want to remind everyone as well that there's a Q&A box in the chat that we're going to get to Q&A in probably only about 5, 6, 7 minutes from now. So get your questions in there. When I think about search ops and I think about these different business units, and we start talking about this kind of new era of automation, in reality, a lot of the functions have remained the same, but what we're thinking about is how that workflow takes place, right? So we're still producing content, we still have technical fixes on a platform, we're pushing out fixes to the live world, we're gaining traffic, we're guiding people through our websites, we're supporting that with advertising campaigns and with our brand work. And so this convergence, as we see it now, between the very important human work, which still exists, we keep talking about being taken over by robots and systems, but in reality, the facilitator to this is the automation, right? The facilitator is the platform. So it's really about supporting the great work of individuals and teams by providing them with the right information to then spend the time doing their work. I remember a long time ago, was when DeepCrawl was starting out, there was a big multinational that had a large agency effectively paying people to push buttons, right? And they said, hey, now, okay, great, now the platform can do this, but you don't want to get rid of those people. You want those people now to do really high value things to do with the content they're producing, analyzing the data, and so forth. So how do you see automation and that blending between the automated bit and the brain power of the humans?
Yeah, this is one of the most interesting topics to me of what's happening right now. So actually think about this. I put together a little 2x2 because I'm one of those nerdy people who likes to map things in 2x2. So forgive me, but indulge me for a moment here, because I think we can look at this on 2 dimensions. One dimension is how automated something is, right? Things that are just being done completely manually versus things that, are being done completely automatically on autopilot. But there's also another dimension, which to me is really about tapping into our capabilities as humans, and let's face it, there's a lot of work that humans have done that doesn't really tap into that. It's not very human work. Like anytime you find yourself cutting and pasting things from one screen to another screen, you're thinking, wow, yeah, this is definitely not fulfilling my ambitions, artistic visions of what could be possible in life. So if you look at that as a 2x2, like less automated, more automated, but also less human and more human, there's plenty of stuff in that lower left quadrant where, well, it's not automated, but to be honest, it's not very human either. When we think about automation, most of the time we usually jump to this idea of, oh, okay, I just want to be able to take one of those things I was doing manually and now have it done automatically for me. And anytime you think about things like rules-based automation, like, okay, if this happens here as a trigger, turn around and execute this action, there's a ton of this. And it's actually very valuable. There's a lot of value we're getting out of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about the journey with the journey of the SEO into the marketing department and the digital marketing side, and going out and finding problems that you need to fix, but then being able to share and divide and conquer on the outcomes, right? So I'm a technical person, I've got to fix this number of systems, but actually this goes across to a content issue that needs to be fixed by this team, and it rolls back up into the overall strategy. And that's certainly an area that kind of the automation hub part of DeepCrawl started to look at. When you focus about the magical example, tell me a bit more.
Yeah. Okay. So we got the automated. On the other dimension, there are things we do that are more human. And there's a ton of great examples about marketing. Marketing is a very creative, empathetic discipline. But the simplest thing you can think is like basically talking with a customer. I mean, not just answering some question that the customer could have gone answered self-service, but actually talking with a customer and understanding what's motivating them and like getting that feedback and connecting it towards how can we evolve our business and our offerings to better serve them. That is incredibly valuable. And that's a very human thing to do. Now, what's interesting, what's so exciting about the things that are starting to happen now is it's not just either or. Oh, well, it's either going to be automated or it's going to be human. It's that quadrant in the upper right where we are actually getting both of those things to converge. That we're using automation, we're using algorithms, we're using AI to be able to deal with a scale of like evaluating, what is happening, what do we need to deliver, all this sort of like millions of operations, that is happening across that big ops organization. We want the machine to be doing as much of the scale work for that. But then what we want is we want the machine to be able to help us identify the opportunities out of that incredible, like vast landscape where something is happening, there's an opportunity for a human to intervene and bring their unique talents and skills to either whether it's resolving the problem or, finding the way to creatively take advantage of an opportunity that's been identified. This blend between automated and human is where all the exciting innovation over this next 10 years is going to be. And so that's why I call it magical. It's like it's the best of both. It's like humans, but we're able to apply ourselves across a scale that in human history was just never even able to be imagined.
Yeah, very cool. And it really is this, we look at the automation and the technical piece as the facilitator to free up the great human resource to be able to do the special things, the strategy, the tactics, the parts that require brain power. Very cool. So we've got a couple of minutes and we'll get on to questions. I'll just give a very brief matching of how kind of the evolution of DeepCrawl along the journey. Interesting, when I got involved was right at the beginning of the journey with the guys. And as mentioned, the world was very different, and it was very much a kind of a link building, SEO, very, very technical world. But what we've seen over time is how this integration that we've been talking about has required systems to enable the independent users and the different groups to really come together and to be able to work in harmony in these and outside of the silos, as you've been explaining. So the two elements that we've seen as really important. One is that there's a platform that enables the identification of problems, right? So you've got the core kind of analytics hub part of DeepCrawl that will go out and it will say you've got a load of 404 errors, you've got broken links, you've got a lot of technical problems in your large website. And then you've got the automation hub that says, okay, can we plug into your dev team? Can we plug into your marketing team, your content team, and enable the right messages to come to the right people at the right time to then allow you to get on with fixing the issue. So kind of more of a preemptive shift of mindset to solve problems before they hit the real world. What we don't want, and I think ASOS had a very tough life example of this, was when they went live with a big error on their website, and it cost them millions because they shut off a part of their website. So I think the idea and the evolution of generally working in the technical and the digital marketing space is to try and be preemptive, to try and have at your fingertips the information required to be able to find the problems before they happen, before they go live, and really set the organization up for success. Ultimately, SEO today, we see very much as the foundation of your house, right? You can build the most beautiful house in the world, but if the foundations aren't solid, then it all collapses. So get the foundations right, and then give the ability for your creative teams to go out and win from there. So just putting up very quickly, and this is a manifesto, which is a little bit thinking about, we talked about the evolution between the CMO of maybe 15 years ago, right, and the CMO of today. And I think they went through this journey where we talked about being digital first, right, Scott? And then now it's like, is it coming towards a search first kind of CMO? I don't know if your thoughts very briefly on this, but to the CMO that doesn't have this in their toolkit, you've got to learn, right? Otherwise.
Yeah. So I think one of the things we know for true, like everyone agrees, the world is just going digital. Everything's going digital. But there's a subtle thing beyond that that is just crucial for a CMO to understand strategically, which is the digital landscape is for all practical purposes infinite. Right? I mean, just the amount of content that can be created, the things that can be published, the variations. I mean, algorithms and machines can just pump this out at a ridiculous rate. So if you are competing in the digital landscape and that landscape is infinite, the game comes down to, really more than anything else, can customers find you? When they are looking, can they find what you have to offer? And, you know, the more infinite, I'm not sure that actually works, you know, with an infinite digital landscape, search is crucial, you know? And so again, there's this idea of taking this beyond, you know, just, yeah, as you stated at the beginning, Simon, you know, the little quarter, you know, dark art there, to something that's just embedded into the operations of how the marketing organization and the digital business as a whole runs. I just see it as crucial.
That's awesome, Scott. So we're hitting up against the wall. So we're going to go on to some Q&A now. And I'll just stop the share for a moment so that we can see each other's face a little bit clearer. So first up question, Andrew Herkart said he loves the water park analogy that you came up with. And he had retweeted the exact comparison when he posted a few weeks ago. So the question is, how should marketers approach the mix of paid versus organic search, and any best practices of how they should work together?
Yeah, so they're definitely related, but I think, yeah, you know, the execution layer of what happens with search engine optimization, I think is just a significantly more sophisticated capability and an art. You know, not to say that the advertising side isn't, you know, important. It's incredibly important, but actually, because of the fact that we're paying in general, you know, these search engines, you know, or social sites or things of this kind, you know, to be able to get in front of the audience, they try to do a lot of the work for us, you know, so there's an interface we fill the gap between, you know, what we want and the capabilities they have. But when it comes to like organic search, right, I mean, the burden is very much on you as a marketer, on your business to figure out how are we going to execute this, you know, not just on and off again. Oh, we're going to try this campaign. Okay, this is fine. But, you know, how do we have that as a continuous evergreen capability of just how the business runs? But I know, Simon, like you're more of the search expert than I am.
So, I mean, I think if we look at how marketers rethink their approach to drive down CAC, right? And whether SEOs investment is a good part of that mix. I always think about it as you've got this wide open tap of paid search, right? If you go back in time to the .com boom and beyond, you could take the search, you could take the e-commerce businesses, the marketing, the travel businesses, etc., and you can just say, I'm going to spend a ton of money on certain terms, and provided my return on investment equals more than I'm paying, I can just spend millions, right? Because I'm going to make more money. It becomes a little bit more complex with businesses that aren't necessarily just pure transactional. So you have to deliver a product and you've got to think about margins. And so it's not the same for all businesses. What is the same for all businesses is SEO, right? You have the ability with organic search to set up your website correctly, to follow the guidelines for how you do that, and then to make sure that you are following what's coming out with the updates from Google on a regular basis. You have the ability to really keep on top of keeping your house in order, and then working in tandem with your content teams and with your overall strategy. And so it should be a bit of both. Like, you can't really do paid successfully without getting the organic bit right. And ultimately, if you get organic right, it's a hell of a lot more cheap, a lot cheaper than the paid version. So do you, and another question from Sarah here. So how can organizations stay competitive in the digital first world? That's a big question, Scott.
Yeah, well, I think the short answer is big ops. You know, that essentially this is not an easy transformation to make. I mean, big data actually wasn't a big an easy transformation to make, and you saw some companies were ahead. Some companies like invested in it earlier. They got there first. They invested even more so than the technology, but in their people, you know, in the process and understanding like, how are we going to harness this as an organization? I feel it's like this same thing with big ops, but even more so. I mean, big ops is a pretty big change in how organizations work and how we connect these different teams using underlying platforms. But again, not just the technology. How do we change the way you know, these teams work? How do we make sure that the strategy that we're doing is taking advantage of that capability? This is going to be a long tail of a bunch of companies that are not going to make that move quickly. And as a result, it's a phenomenal opportunity, you know, for those who say, yes, I get this. I see how we can change the way we run our business to be truly digital native in the way we operate, not just the touch points that we expose to customers. And I think those who are able to take the lead over this next 2, 3, 4 year period will be able to reap a lot of competitive advantage compared to, yeah, the late majority isn't going to get there anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Phil's asked, for B2B businesses, what's a healthy mix of organic versus paid traffic, and is there a standard we should strive for? And this, I know you're looking at it from a Hubspot perspective, you've probably got some views on this. This is a tough question. B2B can be is very different, obviously, to a B2C model.
Yeah, well, I mean, even to your you know, statement earlier too, SEO is almost, the organic side of it is really universal, right? Like, customers are looking for answers. They're looking for offerings. They're looking for things. And basically, if you are able to deliver what they want when they search for it, where they search for it, that's a huge competitive advantage. I mean, B2B has the property that in many ways, right, there's a lot more search activity that happens. You know, I mean, we could argue in, you know, B2C, there's a range of purchases, but there's definitely a whole bunch of purchases that don't require weeks or months of multi-team consideration. You know, my daughter has proven that to me, you know, time and time again. You know, but in B2B, as you start to get up into larger purchases and you get into purchases that are going to require multiple people to be coordinated, all of a sudden, all these different questions that people are looking for the answers to at different stages in that process, you know, they just multiply. And so, yeah, certainly from an organic side, you know, being able to really effectively cover that landscape of buyer questions, yeah, HubSpot can be in that category of folks who say, yeah, that's a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think that, you know, B2B, it becomes more targeted, right? From a reaching out perspective, is your audience, depending on what, you know, what you're selling. If you think about big enterprise deals versus B2B, that might be to the SMB or small business market, right? Which becomes a little bit more like a consumer focus. I've got, so there's a question you're going to like from Amanda, which I think is really relevant to what we've been talking about today. So it's specifically to you, Scott. Who and where have you seen people doing this well? The big ops kind of transformation. Have you seen organizations that are making it a success, and what was different about what they did from others, and what's it mean for departmental interlock, especially sales, IT, product, and marketing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So this is still very early, but actually the companies that we look at, you know, as really some of the pioneers for this are all of the digital natives. You know, I actually was just giving a presentation at the last MarTech conference of some of the capabilities that people are using no-code tools for. And one of the case studies we actually looked at was how Netflix, had adopted this set of capabilities that allowed their marketing team to have like an incredibly customized way in which they were orchestrating so many different facets of the marketing process. Many things that used to be very siloed, like, okay, this is how we think about like what we're managing of our inventory of capabilities, and then over here we have our agencies, and then over here there are these touch points, and and they had basically created a system to help orchestrate all of those pieces together. Yeah, I mean, so I definitely think when you look at the digital natives, there's a lot you can learn from that. But I think we're even starting to see like, boy, there's a group, this is again more B2B, but Philips, I've had a number of talks with, their marketing operations team and what they're doing. In fact, actually, if you search for like MarTech stackies, these like stacks of slides that illustrate the stacks of different tools companies are using. Actually, Philips shared their stacky last year, and you can almost even see through the way that they've designed it, that they're very much thinking about how are they orchestrating an operations layer, that feeds the entire marketing department. So again, don't get me wrong, this is still, the pioneers and the early adopters and the ones who are really, at the leading edge of this. But yeah, if you're interested in learning from them and being able to be one of those, people at the head of the class, it's a great time for that.
Yeah, interesting. The one example in my head, which isn't to do with necessarily exactly the turn to search ops, but when you think about organizations that have made large shifts internally based upon a compelling, we are going to do this. You think about the Facebook move, right? When Zuckerberg turns around and says, everyone's doing everything mobile now. Internally, you throw your laptops out the window. Our users are now all mobile, so everything we do is mobile. And I wonder whether there are any elements to, whether it's like the jump in the cold water type option internally to say, guys, be your own customers, right? Look at how we are engaging with our own platforms, and can we think about that from the shoes of the people outside, and then what are all the things internally that make those things better? Interesting. We've probably got time for one more. So Tristan says, search engines such as Google have moved the goalposts in the past as far as how organic search is calculated. What should companies do to build agility into their organic programs to weather algorithm changes?
Yeah, well, this is again, you're talking to a fellow who is a large advocate of platform mentality, and the number one reason I think platforms are so valuable in so many different contexts is they're basically designed to be a stable foundation that gives you like a coherence and a consistency. But on top of that stable foundation, you have the ability to have all sorts of experimentation and adaptation and specialization, and so again, that's the exact thing. You don't want this like highly specialized capability that's all targeted around, oh, this is the exact way Google seems to be working right now, and you've built up this massive stack, and then Google changes it and suddenly that whole stack, goes away. What you want, is this layered capability that, okay, the parts that, specialize to take advantage of particular, it's almost like a search arbitrage of, hey, here's an opportunity of where we can do that. You want to be able to do those things, but you want them to be at the layer that they can come and they can go. And then the layer below that doesn't have to change with every single one of those adaptations.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation, and the changes are incremental typically with what Google's doing, and they don't normally, unless it's to crack down on something where people have been doing bad practice. They don't normally do something that then wipes you out. And in the past with the JCPenney example was because guess what, they had been buying links and all of these things. So back to that old school dark arts. I think that the core of having the right platforms that are providing the right information to you. If you don't have all the capability in-house, make sure that your partners and your agencies can support you with that. But having the platforms that can identify the problems and can be ahead of that, and having a strategy that means that you're not taken off base by something that happens as an update, because you're generally working to the right format and the right rules for how you build good foundations to your sites, how you're making changes and how you're doing updates. So what I'm going to do, we're just about at the end here, so I'm just going to share very quickly and just wrap up. Hopefully this has been interesting to everyone. I want to thank Scott, obviously, for your time. The ebook that we've been working on with Scott is being sent to all of the participants as soon as possible, as soon as it's available. Quick reminder that there is a survey at the end of this presentation, and it's literally 1 minute, so we'd appreciate your feedback. We want to thank Scott. I want to thank all of you for joining, and hopefully there will be some interesting opportunities to engage with you all in the future, and more information and good talks coming up. So thanks to you, Scott. Thanks to everyone, and we will speak to you soon, hopefully.
Take care.